Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
In this and the next few lessons, we're going to be exploring the filter function. By far, not only one of my favorite dynamic array functions, but I think possibly one of my favorite Excel functions, full stop. And the reason why I love filter so much is because it's so versatile and so useful. And we're going to dedicate the next few lessons to taking a look at filter because it has quite a few different options that you need to understand, because each one of those options will give you a different result. Now, let's first start out in this lesson by understanding what the filter function is and why we might want to use it. Now, historically, when it comes to filtering, most of us have been used to using the filter drop-downs. So I have a little data set over here that just shows some students, the exam they took, the grade they achieved, and the date. So if I click in the header up here, I can go to data and I can turn on filters. So if I wanted to see all of the students that sat the French exam, I can simply select it, click on OK, and it's going to filter those results. Now, there's a couple of issues with this. Notice that when I filtered these results, some of the other information I had on this worksheet disappeared because filtering hides the rows. You can see here the row numbers have turned to blue, and that really lets us know that we have hidden rows amongst these. So it's hidden some of the items that I had in column G, which on some worksheets, that's not going to be practical. So let's undo. And I can now see those back again. The other drawback with filter drop-downs is that we can only filter in place. As in, when I apply my filters, the filter will apply exactly to the table of data. I can't choose a filter and have it output the results anywhere else in the worksheet. And also with filter, once I filter my data, aside from maybe doing a sort on top of that, there isn't really a great deal else I can do with those filtered results. And that is where the filter function comes in, because it kind of solves all of those issues. With the filter function, we can output the results of a filter to anywhere in our spreadsheet because we're using a dynamic array function. We can perform more complex filters, and we can combine them with things like data validation, which is exactly what we're going to do in this lesson. So let's start out with just a very basic filter. Now, notice in column G here, I have exam, date, and grade. So what I want to be able to do for this first example is select an exam from a drop-down list, and I wanted to filter the results from this table and output them over here. So the first thing to do is to set up our data validation. So I just want to list out all of the exams once. So I want a unique list of all of the exams. And we've spoken about unique quite a bit so far in this course. So what I'm going to do somewhere over here is I'm going to type in unique, and I'm going to select all of the exams. Control-Shift down arrow. Remember, if you want this to be more dynamic, you can put it into a table. I haven't in this instance. So now we have a unique list of all of the exams. So we only actually have 4 exams that these students took: French, English, Maths, and Science. So now that we have the unique list, I can create a data validation drop-down. So up to data, across to data tools, and we want to select data validation. Now we're going to create a list, and our source for this list is over here. Now I could use my little pound trick like that because we're using a dynamic array function. Let's click on OK, and you can now see that I have a drop down with all of those exams listed out. Now I'm only going to do a data validation drop down for the exam in this lesson. We will create others as we progress through the lessons on filter. But let's just do a very basic filter first of all. So I'm going to select Maths from here. So what I want to do effectively is use what we have in the filter to produce a filtered list of all of the students that sat the Maths exam in columns I to L. So let's type in equals filter. We have 3 arguments here. The first 2 are mandatory, the last one is optional. So the first thing it's asking us for is the array that we want to filter. Now I want to return all of the information for the student. So I want to see the student name, the exam, the grade, and the date. If I was only interested in student and exam, I would only need to select those columns. But because I want everything, my array is going to be everything. Control-Shift down arrow to select everything, Control backspace to jump back up, comma. Now we specify what we want to include. So what do we want to filter? Well, I want to filter for only students that sat the maths exam. So we're going to say include when the exam, Control-Shift-Down arrow, is equal to whatever we have in cell G6. So this is going to make this dynamic because the formula will update when we change the exam in that drop-down, comma. If empty. This is the optional argument. This just basically allows us to define what we want to see in the cell if it can't find any records. So I'm just going to say no records. Let's close the bracket, hit enter, check out what we have. I'm now seeing all of the students who sat the maths exam, the grade and the date. Now notice here the dates aren't formatted, so let's select that entire column and we're going to change that to short date. And the cool thing about this is if this exam changes, so let's select English, you can see all of those results update, same with French and the same with science. So that is how we can perform a basic filter using the filter function. We're going to carry on taking a look at this over the next couple of lessons, so let's jump across there now. In the previous lesson, we started taking a look at the filter function, and we worked through a very basic example where we were simply filtering by one item, the exam. Now, in this example, we're going to take a look at how you can filter with OR logic. Now, what is OR logic? Well, it means that we work into the filter function, return results that equal this or that. So in this example, it's going to be return results that equal maths or grade A. Now, before we get to constructing the actual formula, we need to do some prep work just here. Now, I've already gone in and I've created a table out of my data set. If you go to the table design ribbon, you can see that I've called it exam results. So by doing this, I've now made my data dynamic because if we add any more students on the end, it means our filter is going to automatically update. Now, the next thing to do is to add in our data validation drop-down lists. So I've already created a unique list over here of the exams in preparation for the drop-down. I just need to do the same for the grades. So in column O, let's type in equals. Again, we're just going to go for unique, and we want to select the grade column. Now, because this is in a table, I can just click the column and it's going to add that in. Notice it's using table references, exam results, which is the table name, grade, which is the column. Close the bracket, hit enter, and now we have those grades. So we can set up our data validation. Let's go for exam first. I'm going to go into data, click the drop down here and data validation. We want to create ourselves a list and our source is this just here. Now you could select them all or press that pound symbol. Click on OK and there is my list. Let's do the same for the grades. So we're going to go back into data validation. We're going to create a list. Our source is over here and I'm going to do the pound symbol, click on OK. So now I have two really functional lists that I can use to change my filter results. And remember, if you don't want anybody to see these unique formulas over here, you can simply right click and hide those columns. So now let's construct our filter because we are doing something slightly different here. So our array, what do we want to filter? Well, again, I'm still returning all of the results, all of the columns. I want to see the student, the exam, the grade, and the date. So my array is my entire table. Now I can select my table, or if you have named your table, you can simply start to type it in. So I called mine exam results. There it is. Press tab, and it's going to select the table. Comma, include. Now for this argument, we want to include in our filter anybody who sat the English exam or achieved a grade of D. So we have two pieces of criteria. Now, if you have two pieces of criteria, they need to go inside brackets. So our first piece of criteria, let's open a bracket. We want to include when the exam equals what we have in cell G5, in this case, English. Close off our first piece of criteria. So now because we're doing an OR, we want to say return those who sat the English exam or achieved a grade of D. The OR logical operator is represented as a plus in between our criteria. So I'm going to add a plus in there, and then we can add in our second piece of criteria. So our second piece of criteria is if the grade is equal to what we have in cell G8. So we're doing an OR here. That's the logic. Close our second piece of criteria. Comma. What do we want to display in the cell if it can't find any results? Well, again, I'm just going to say no records. Close off filter, hit enter, and check out what we have. So it's returning any result where the student sat the English exam or they achieved a grade of D. So here, Lucy Carter, she sat the English exam. Ming Xia, now he sat the maths exam, but he got a grade of D, so he's been included in the results. So you'll see that the students that are included will either have English as the exam they sat or grade D. And again, notice here we need to apply some formatting to our date column. I'm going to change those to short date. So what we can now do is we can go in and we can change these filters around. So now I'm only seeing students who sat the maths exam or achieved a grade E. So that's how you can return results using OR logic and two pieces of criteria. We're going to carry on taking a look at the filter function in this lesson, but this time we're going to use a different piece of logic. This time we're going to use AND logic. So if you recall, in the last lesson, we saw how to apply filters with OR logic. So we were saying return results where the student has sat the French exam or achieved a result of grade B. Whereas this time we're going to be saying return all of the students who sat the French exam and achieved a result of grade B. And we're going to add a bit more complexity to this because we have a third piece of criteria, and that is the month. So since the last lesson, I've added in another column to the table that just shows the month that these exams were taken. And it was only across a period of 2 months, January, and some exams bled into the month of February. Now, to extract the month, all I did was use this formula here, text. So this formula is saying, look at this cell here, the date cell, and extract the month. And because we're using the text version, it's going to be the text version of the month, so Jan, Feb, Mar, as opposed to the actual month number, 1, 2, 3. So that's all I did there and copied it down. I then, in column P, just did exactly the same and created a unique list of those months. And we've set all of that up in drop-down lists. So now we're ready to do our filter. So let's type in equals. We're going to go for filter. Our array, again, we're filtering everything in the exam results table, include. Now, we have 3 pieces of criteria. We need to make sure we enclose them in brackets. So our first piece of criteria is if the exam is equal to French in this case. So we want to select the exam column and say if that's equal to what we have in cell H5. Close the bracket to close off our first piece of criteria. Now this is where the change comes in because we're doing an AND as opposed to an OR. So the symbol used to represent AND is not a plus, it's an asterisk. And then we can go into our second piece of criteria. So now we want to include when the month column is equal to what we have in cell H9. Close the bracket and we have a third piece of criteria. So asterisk, open another bracket. Include when the grade is equal to what we have in cell H13. Close the bracket, comma. Final argument, what do we want to have in the cell if it can't find any results? So once again, I'm going to say no records. Close the bracket, hit enter, and check out what we get. Now this is correct. I can see that I need to add another column heading. So let's just move our unique formulas along a little bit. And we're just going to add another column in here for month. And let's copy the formatting. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So check it out very quickly there. We've now managed to apply 3 pieces of criteria. And you can see we only have 1 student who sat the French exam in the month of January and achieved a result of B. So let's change this up and take a look. Let's go for English. We'll go for the month of February. No records. So nobody sat the English exam in the month of February and achieved a grade B. Let's go for maths. I'm going to change this to January. And let's say who failed. Helen Mills failed her maths exam in January. So the difference here is that all of these conditions effectively have to be true in order for us to return this result. That's the biggest difference between and or. By now you should be getting the hang of how the filter function works. We've seen 3 examples of how we can use the filter function, including how to use it with multiple pieces of criteria and different pieces of logic. Now we're going to carry on in this lesson by taking a look at the equals operator. So this logic is what we refer to as both or neither. So what exactly does that mean? Well, we're going to set up a filter formula that's going to look for just the exams and the grades. And the results that I want to return would either match exactly French and grade E or neither of those. So what it won't return are students who sat the French exam who got a grade A, because it has to be both that we've selected or none at all. So let's see what that looks like. We're going to type in equals filter. Our array, again, this time I'm going to type it in and select it because we do have it set up as a table. There it is, exam results. And we're only doing 2 pieces of criteria. So let's open a bracket. We want to include where the exam is equal to what we have in cell H5. That's our first piece of criteria. We should be reasonably familiar with that. But this time the operator we're going to be using is equals. Let's open another bracket. Our second piece of criteria, we're not going to do the month, we're just going to stick with grade. So let's select the grade column. And that is equal to whatever we have in cell H13. So if I close off filter, and I need 2 brackets in there, and hit enter, this is the result I'm going to get. Now, let's walk through this so you understand what you're seeing. I currently have a list of students where both the exam they sat was French and the grade was E, and you can see this is a good example of that. So Claire March, she sat the French exam and she achieved a grade of E. If we go a bit further down, you can see Marcus King sat the French exam and achieved a grade of E. So it's including in here everybody who exactly meets both pieces of criteria. But it's also including in here people who match neither. So for example, Lucy Carter, she sat the English exam and achieved a grade of B. And you can see that both English and grade B are not in either of our current selections. The same here with Ming Xia. He sat the maths exam and got a grade D. Neither of those match what we have selected in our drop-downs. So this is returning exact matches, so both or neither. What it's not returning are students that maybe sat the French exam but got a different grade to the one that we've got listed in here. So it's not going to just match one piece of criteria, it has to match them both or not at all. That's the only difference with this filter formula, and to use this type of logic we need to separate our criteria with an equal sign. In the last few lessons, we've been taking a look at the filter function with various different pieces of logic. And it's time to finish off this section about filter by talking about the minus logical operator. This is the final one that you're most likely to encounter. Now, the minus operator basically means one or the other, but not both. So what does that mean in context of our data? Well, let's say that we want to filter our data set by the exam and the grade only. Now, if we use the minus operator, what it means is it's going to filter the students who sat the French exam or achieved a grade B, regardless of what exam is selected. But what it won't return are students that achieved both of these. So students who sat the French exam and achieved a grade of B will be omitted from the results. So it's one or the other, but not both. So if we type in equals filter, we're going to filter our array. So that's everything in our table, comma. What do we want to include? Well, again, we have two pieces of criteria, so we need to put them inside brackets. And the first one is the exam. So we want to include when the exam is equal to what we have in cell H5. Close the bracket. Now this time we're using the minus logical operator, so that needs to go in there next. And then we have our second piece of criteria, which is the grade is equal to what we have in cell H13. Let's close off our criteria, close off filter, hit enter, and there's our results. So if we have a quick check here, you can see that it's included students who sat the French exam and also students who achieved a grade B regardless of what exam they sat. But what you're not going to see in this list are students who achieved a grade B and sat the French exam. So if you take a look at all the results for French, you'll see that none of these students achieved a grade B for French. Let's switch our criteria. So let's go for maths and let's say grade C. So again, it's including students who sat the maths exam or achieved a grade C regardless of the exam, but we're never going to see a student in our results that sat the maths exam and achieved a grade C. So that is the final logical operator that you're most likely to use, the minus, one or the other, but not both. Now, just to round out this lesson, if you want to hide your unique calculations over here, these are the calculations that we use to build our data validation drop-down lists. Remember, you can simply right-click and hide those columns. Alternatively, you can select the cells, Control 1, go to the Number tab and into Custom, and this is where we can type in 3 semicolons, click on OK, and that's going to hide those from view. So that's it. That's everything you need to know about the filter function. As I said, this is one of my favorite functions in Excel. It's so useful in many, many different scenarios.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.